Good morning and or good afternoon, as the case might be. Welcome back or welcome for the first time, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm a partner at Deloitte, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of being a host of our webcast sessions. Typically, we use this forum to connect with Canadian CIOs, tech leaders who are shaping the future of Canada. But today we are changing the format a little bit, and we will use this time to introduce you to the latest research study that Deloitte conducted in Canada specifically on the topic of cloud acceleration. And I have a real pleasure and privilege to welcome two of my colleagues and friends, Young and Karin Wiens, who are going to share their sort of lessons learned from conducting this research study on Canadian cloud adoption. So Karin Wiens is a partner at Deloitte, and she leads our cloud engineering practice in Canada, while Kevin Young is also a partner at the firm and leads our overall cloud transformation portfolio, which integrates all of different Deloitte capabilities on cloud into that single portfolio. So as I mentioned, Kevin and Karin are going to share their observations from this very recent research study that they championed. Using the Q&A function of the Zoom platform you're in. We will do our very best to address as many questions as we can over the balance of this hour. So with that, obviously we are all keen and eager now to hear what is the report. So maybe Kevin, I'll pass the mic over to you to tell us more about this research study, who participated, and what was really the intent of the study. So Kevin, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Dalibor. We're very happy to be here, and I'll just second what Dalibor said. As much as possible, we'd love for this to be a bit of a two-way dialogue. Encourage and welcome questions in the chat there. Maybe I'll just start, Dalibor, by talking about our process. And Sherry, I think you can go to the next page. When we took a look at the landscape and some of the eminence that was out there, you know, there's no shortage of thoughtware, but very little of it focused on the Canadian market and nothing with actual Canadian market data. I think we felt that in the wake of the pandemic, with the tremendous level of growth that we saw, growth in spend and adoption of cloud, it was a perfect time to check in. And so we did that kind of on two fronts. We did a survey to cloud leaders from 200 large Canadian organizations. We augmented that with interviews with over 20 of our large clients. And so you'll see in there, in the report itself, we've got quotes from the CIOs of CIBC, Canada Post, BC Government, Rogers, TELUS. We spoke with the Canadian leaders from the three large public hyperscalers, public cloud hyperscalers as well, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And Karin and I really kind of tag team these sessions. It was fascinating to have a conversation as far as what these leaders were seeing with respect to cloud adoption in their organizations, some of the major drivers, opportunity areas, the challenges, how they felt about pace specifically. Karin quarterbacked, I would say, more of the public sector conversations, and I would have focused more on the private sector organizations. It was kind of a cross-industry report, just given the focus and what we were after with this piece. Now, we didn't want to stick strictly to the data, Dalibor, so we also wanted this to be a point of view weaved into a story in terms of the state of cloud adoption in Canada, the barriers, and some of our perspectives, some of our leaders' perspectives on how to accelerate. And for that last piece, our point of view pulled in insights from cloud leaders across our consulting practice in Canada, and globally in terms of some of the research that our Global Center for Integrated Research has done as well. Let's go to the next page. In terms of what's in here, you'll see it's split out into these 5 chapters. And so that first piece, from why to how fast, really checks in on current adoption trends and some of the changing perceptions around cloud. The looking ahead piece is a bit more forward-looking, a forecast that combines some of the Gartner spend data that's out there, as well as information or data from our survey respondents in terms of how they're feeling and how quickly they plan on moving to cloud, continuing to move to cloud in the future. The latter 2 chapters expand on some of the key barriers and challenges and provide some of our leaders' perspective on how to accelerate. And we can kind of give some highlights as we go through this, Dalibor.
Yeah. So this is excellent. I very much look forward to sort of hearing the rest of the conversation today. So pandemic was obviously a pivotal moment in the cloud adoption. I think that we can probably with confidence say that not only did IT show up to save the day, the cloud element of IT really showed up to save the day to most organizations through this pandemic. So there is no surprise. I think expectation is that cloud adoption really sort of skyrocketed through the pandemic. How are Canadian leaders' perceptions of cloud? How are they evolving? And what would you say are the key drivers of cloud adoption now?
Yeah, good question, Dalibor. Sherry, let's go to the next slide here. I guess maybe just to reinforce what you said there, Dalibor, as far as the growth that we saw, and the Gartner data on the right-hand side is spend across different cloud segments for 2020 specifically. And so, I mean, if you think back at that time, despite an overall economic recession in the immediate aftermath of COVID, most of the cloud segments were kind of growing 40% plus in terms of the spend we were seeing in market. And I know we from a Deloitte perspective keenly felt that. I think Karin's practice has easily doubled or more since that time. And really overnight, I think that shift to remote work, that move away from kind of physical in-person distribution channels with customers, with supply chain, a lot of our clients felt very keenly the limits of legacy. Let's go to the next page and share some of the specific data points from our report here. We talk about this shift from why cloud to how and how fast. And, I think that came through loud and clear in both the data and the interviews that we had, whereas a few years ago, I think there was still a lot of focus in selling the organization on cloud and justifying the investment for cloud and, all of the concerns around security and privacy. While some of that persists, I think there is definitely a sense of inevitability around the move to cloud. Most organizations have accepted that this is the direction. One of the CIOs I spoke to likened the transition as similar to moving from the horse and buggy to the combustion engine. It's just treated as a given. And you see that in some of the points on the left here. The majority of our respondents characterize cloud as very important to achieving business success, 64%. With clear connections between cloud as an enabler of business model transformation, cloud as helping organizations become digital first, obvious connections with remote work. On the right-hand side here, what also came through in the data in the interviews is this idea or connection between cloud and broader, more systemic forms of disruption. So as part of our Deloitte Global Resilience Survey, we know many large organizations are girding themselves for that next big disruption. You'll see there 6 out of 10 leaders expect to see disruption at the scale of COVID-19 or climate change again in the future. And so there is this sense around the need to have agility to pivot and respond more quickly, and the clear ties to cloud that came through in some of our conversations and in terms of some of the survey data around that. Now, Dalibor, you asked about specific drivers of adoption. Sherry, go to the next page here. We did look at, in the survey, what patterns for investment were kind of top of organizations' list as far as driving spend in cloud? And I think it was interesting to see cybersecurity scoring at the top of this list here, just given, I think it also scored quite high as a barrier as well. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there in terms of perceptions around security in cloud. Perhaps less surprisingly, big data analytics, AI as a category would be second, followed by integration, API management, and so forth. So again, just to kind of give you a flavor for those, coming back to the hundreds of organizations that would have participated in the survey, where they're seeing the drivers for adoption and spend right now.
This is a genuine surprise for me to see that cybersecurity on cloud is seen as, and it's quite clearly seen as the lead driver now. Less surprised about big data, but I think that this insight is interesting. I think many of the audience members will also say, that's an angle that perhaps potentially we could and should explore. Thank you very much for that. This is very interesting. So so the question then is, when we look at the fuller, bigger picture of sort of where are Canadian organizations today on their cloud adoption journey, and I know, of course, this will depend on the size and maturity and industry, but I would be curious to get a sense, and maybe Karin, you can help us with this. What actually is the current states of cloud adoption in the country?
Yeah, thanks, Dalibor. And I'll use the research study, but I've also got a number of anecdotes that I'll share with you. Why don't we go to the next slide? So it's a bit of a look of where are we and what's the history, right? Like on the right side, those colored bars kind of articulate by industry how many years ago they started their cloud journeys. And so, from where we are right now, late into the COVID pandemic, this has accelerated a lot of clients' journey to the cloud, but many of them started long ago. We saw that the majority told us that they started as long as 3 to 6 years ago, and it does vary by industry. The ones that were really leading as far as 7 to 10 years ago were largely in telecom media, and technology firms. They had a natural imperative by where they sit to start adopting earlier, testing and experimenting. More recently, we've certainly seen consumer, energy, financial services sectors jump on. And one thing that's interesting, like the second bar there, that's the I don't know if the font is a bit small to see on the screen. Energy and resources looks like a more recent adopter. And that's an industry where I've been doing a bit of work with some clients in particular. Recently, I hosted a panel of clients from the energy and resources industry as part of our Deloitte 360 by Deloitte event a couple of weeks ago. And I believe those recordings are still available on our site. And even within the 4 clients that were with me on that panel, there was varying adoption from the leading firm had started there as much as 3 to 6 years ago, having achieved significant transformation. They would call themselves, as not only cloud first, but cloud everything. And, to the comment about security from the previous slide, their executive would absolutely say that the cloud is far more secure, that the investments that the hyperscalers make are far beyond what any individual firm can make on their own. And he does have board level buy-in in his firm. Other clients are still, while the leading technology stakeholders may understand that, agree with it, and believe that and share that messaging, some of their executives are still harder to convince. And so just coming back to the energy and resources, so we have a spectrum of clients that are very far down the journey, others that are have built strong business cases and are well advanced on the journey, making very thoughtful, planful measures, and others that have started with a SaaS or cloud first, as it's sometimes called. And we'll come back to that a little bit later in this conversation approach. So you see a spectrum everywhere across these industries. And so there's a lot of room to evolve, but that's that's where we saw our clients today. Maybe going to the next slide. By the way, I didn't comment too much on public sector, but what I'll say is just a quick broad brush, maybe coming back to the previous one. In public sector, there's also varying adoption of cloud with some levels of government, and of course, there's tremendous variability between federal, provincial, and broader public sector, everything from health, education, et cetera. There were more use case specific cloud adoption stories. So we saw less of this end-to-end commitment to broad-based transformation, but some strong use cases where cloud has been embraced heavily. So anyway, I wanted to make sure I touched on the public sector there. So continuing on then, where is the journey right now? So I touched on a little bit the nomenclature, cloud first, and what that means. So, those bubbles on the left, we talk about where certain clients are. Some are at the discovery phase. Some have put strong foundations in place. Many are at the migration and scaling phase. Those bubbles are not a spectrum. So cloud first is just another bubble. It doesn't come after migration and scaling. In fact, some clients we found use the term cloud first to indicate that they are where they're implementing new solutions, that they would go SaaS first. So it did not necessarily mean that they were transforming or moving towards PaaS or infrastructure as code. So there are varying stages of cloud adoption across the clients that we interviewed. On the right side there, and I fear that at least on my version, the font is a bit too small to read. Some of the clients that were maybe less ambitious were, at the SaaS stage. Other ones, where that middle bar is where the majority of workloads, projects, workflows, processes are or will be enabled by cloud. So that's where a lot of our clients felt they were. And then going to the right, like the right two bars, kind of that last third of the continuum is clients who felt that they are cloud native. Use it as a default for all workloads. And that smallest sliver at the end is, we are no longer in the data center business. We have left the on-prem world. So those are truly the leaders. They are still a small percentage. Many clients will never get there and don't aspire to get there, but knowing that in certain industries and segments that this is possible and is a tremendous benefit to those businesses is, they can be role models for other clients.
Well, I think it's really important to appreciate, although you mentioned it's a very small number by number, that we have discovered that there indeed are, I'm going to assume these are large, important organizations,
yes,
that are there, that have said we are no longer in data center business. All we do is in the cloud. I think I've been waiting to hear a real story about this now for a while, and it's great for me to hear this from you, that such examples actually do exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And more to come,
one of those
obviously.
stories from the Deloitte 360 by Deloitte event that we hosted.
Yeah, this is excellent. Yeah.
I think, Karin, part of the reason why we're kind of isolating software as a service, like when we took a look at the data around organizations starting their journey 3 to 6 years ago, I think everybody kind of started with software as a service. But in those cases where the software provider is managing all of the cloud infrastructure, it's kind of a different ballgame altogether when an organization kind of then transitions into building their own technical foundation, their own cloud capabilities internally to adopt cloud more broadly. And so that I think is the transition that I think we heard from a number of the folks that we spoke to in the interviews. I mean, you see sort of that largest bucket sitting in the migration and scaling piece. There were a number of organizations that we spoke to that have been at it for a few years. They've invested in a technical foundation. They've started building capability. They've declared, a couple of hyperscaler partnerships and have that contracting in place. And it's really a question of how do they transition from some of the early stage POCs to scaling with pace across the organization. And so that is kind of a big theme for the rest of the paper, just as far as some of the inherent challenges in that, as the diversity and number of workloads picks up, as far as the organizational complexity of trying to support multiple business or functional areas across the organization, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, to touch on a couple more use cases, while we're here on this slide, we talk about getting out of data centers. Sometimes that's a cost savings play. It may or may not be the strategic as far as transforming applications and ways of working. There is a use case, there is a business case to be had there. We've also seen clients looking at cloud as a way of transforming an outsourcing relationship or exiting an outsourcing relationship, right? It kind of changes the playing field for clients that are approaching negotiations with outsourcing vendors to kind of take away some of the power from those vendors and put them on a different platform going into negotiations or extensions. Other use cases that we've seen center more around innovation, and that can include non-technical business cases, incubating new business models with minimal investment, looking into use cases around safety, risk management, experimentation. And so the cloud enables a lot of that. And then, coming back to public sector specifically, and, pandemic specifically, we've done work with a number of federal agencies and provinces as well, related to some of the solutions that had to be implemented very quickly, related to vaccines, supply chains, distribution of vaccines, appointment booking. And those solutions all had to be put into place very, very rapidly. And while many of those public sector clients had been working for some time to put foundations and solutions in place to enable cloud, they weren't at scale. And so they had to make some specific exceptions to go at pace, in the pandemic to deliver those solutions. And they were successful, largely very successful, delivering at a scale and pace that nobody ever would have thought possible. And some of those have now said, like, wow, we achieved amazing results. We did it kind of quickly. Maybe we didn't have a full business case and all the processes and change management and governance in place. And now we're going to take a pause and go back and put those things in place, right? We're going to revisit our business cases. We're going to look more, what are the right things to continue moving to cloud and be more thoughtful about it. But we proved we could do it quickly when we had to.
So Karin, you just triggered a very, very important point that I would like to just re-emphasize, and then I'll add one more. That so I mentioned cloud saved the day in the opening remarks, and I think my perspective was cloud saved the day for our organization that we work with, in our case, our client organizations. But what you just reminded us is that governments through this pandemic mobilized to deliver, vaccine solutions, and we know because we're because of the work that we do, that almost every single one of those governments actually leveraged cloud solution to bring this fast. So, what a great story to tell! What a great impactful story to tell of how it can actually be done quickly and done well. I don't know what this could have looked like if pandemic was hitting us 20 years ago, right? So this was very, very important thing to mention, that how part of the story of looking into cloud adoption, we have that use case around pandemic that is very, very real and was very, very successful. The second thing I want you to bring up is you both have in your background the tech trends, Deloitte Tech Trends reports, which, by the way, today is the launch day of our Tech Trends 2022. So I would encourage all the audience members to check that out. I'll send the links afterwards. But here was an interesting piece. In our Tech Trends 2021, last year's version, we actually spoke about the new business models and new financial concepts and models that large hyperscalers offer to organizations that were not previously available. Things such as bringing hyperscaler on board and entering into conversations with them for a potential co-investment that makes your business case to move workloads into the cloud easier to, easier to chew and digest, because of such a great desire of these hyperscalers to work with, especially large organizations across the country. So we actually spoke about that trend, and those who might be interested to reflect on that, I would encourage you to look at Tech Trends 2021 on that topic. The new business models that are available now to co-fund and co-finance your cloud transformations, leveraging relationships with hyperscalers. Anyways, that's just what I wanted to add. So back to you.
That was a great, that's a great call out, Dalibor. Like the new business models enabled by cloud come from a few things, right? I mean, one, the investment, like actual potential cash investment or technology investment from the hyperscalers, but just by, the very nature of their value prop, like the ability to scale up, scale down. And, every year, the hyperscalers are adding more services where, things are just baked into what they offer. So less things have to be built from scratch. Within the development shop, and then technologies like serverless, right, are all ways to really minimize spend on infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure and really focus on the value you get out of those services.
Yeah.
There was a question that I just went back to, and that was related to, whether or not cloud adoption differs by IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and whether that inflates the perception of cloud adoption by industry. I think I may have addressed that in some of my remarks, like certainly in what Kevin layered on, right? Like there is definite differences between SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and they all seem to be moving at different paces. They have different value propositions, and they each move at different paces in different industries.
Well, and we've talked, Karin, about for large Canadian organizations, it's like the third inning as far as that transition to public cloud. If you were to exclude software as a service, most of the clients that we've worked with where we've had a peek under the covers, like I would say it's in and around kind of 10% of their workloads on public cloud. Again, excluding some of the big packaged solutions that would fall into that SaaS category. And so it's still very early days as far as that longer term transition. And I think, there was a couple of folks that I spoke to on the commercial side, Karin, that I was almost impressed at the extent to which the patience in recognizing this as a systemic and long-term transition, right? Like they're kind of quoting 8 to 10 year transition plans. I think overall, and there are parts of the survey and parts of the conversation, and this comes through in the report where we would push for, I think, a higher degree of urgency. I think we would characterize the Canadian market overall as very likely behind a lot of our other geographic markets that we as a firm serve, certainly a couple of years behind the US, who we work with pretty closely. But yeah, it's there is definitely that gap there to the point made in this question.
So we want to keep going. The next slide is, looking ahead, the cloud adoption plateau. So, we see some potentially contradictory sentiments here, right? And we've been reconciling those. Most Canadian leaders, in fact, 74% do plan to increase their cloud spend. The analysts have forecasted that spend on public cloud will exceed $1 billion by 2025. And, how does this translate to business impact and change, right? So in some places we found a lack of ambition, right? So surprise to us was that some of the respondents indicated they only expect to shift as much as 5% more of their workloads to cloud, both public and private, over the next 3 years. More than a quarter said that they were still in the experimenting and planning stages, and that in a few years that they would be spending the next couple of years at those stages. About 30% believe they'll still be cloud first at that time. So, we propose that businesses, or we believe businesses may be experiencing a bit of a plateau here, right? A stall in the adoption of cloud, and a stall into organizational transformation. I referenced the use case of the government agency that went very quickly to adopt certain solutions, but realized that they may have skipped a few steps, and they need to go back and make sure they've got true, governance and organizational change management and things in place in order to be able to pick up speed again. And so one thing, this could be a concern. If you think about this for the economy and the implications for Canada, we look at the US market, and we see them as being anywhere from 12 to 18 to 24 months ahead in terms of cloud adoption. Certainly when I work with colleagues south of the border, they have greater depth of experience just based on the nature of how their clients are engaging them. So why do we think this is happening, and what can be done about it, right? This is the important place to dig in here a little bit. So some of the challenges that we identified as potentially resulting in this plateau are lack of the appropriate organizational skills. And we're seeing more and more clients engaging us. And I'll give Kevin a moment to weigh in here if he wants to, but as part of our cloud transformation program, we work closely with other parts of Deloitte, including our human capital practice, where we work closely and bring in those change management professionals and organizational professionals that help work with us, the cloud experts, to help our clients figure out how to transform and change the right way, right? So operating models, and get the right expertise and leadership there to drive programs forward. We also found generally a lack of skills, technical skills, and this, I think we saw this across every industry in Canada. We see this globally. In fact, as much as it feels that we are desperately short of the skills that we need in Canada, many countries have it worse, and I will say that we're very, very fortunate because of the immigration policies in our country that allow for technical talent to migrate here in a very fluid way. And I think ultimately that may cause some gaps in other countries that don't have that advantage that we do. I think it's an understated advantage that we don't always realize. And then having insufficient investment in technical foundations, putting those standards and platforms and tools in place that allow companies and governments to hit their stride when they're getting around to deployment at scale. So just pausing for a moment, before we go on to how we break through. Kevin, did you want to add to that at all, or?
I'll just say, Karin, I'm sure it was the same in some of the interviews you sat in on. There was a common refrain that the technology is the quote unquote easy part, and talent and organizational dimensions are typically the hardest nuts to crack there. And there's definitely no silver bullet. This is obviously whether we're talking cloud engineering, data engineering, cybersecurity, all of those skill sets are highly constrained in the marketplace right now. But that just kind of reinforces the need to be very deliberate in terms of planning for that transition of your technology workforce. And then, of course, the changes to the ways of working that you want to affect to unlock the value of that cloud investment, right? It is as much an organizational transformation as it is a technology transformation.
Yeah. Just pausing, and don't clear the questions yet, Dalibor, so we can all, a couple of questions that came in. So what's the reason that we may be behind other countries? It's a great question. I mean, the research didn't go into that, like into the why, so I can't speak from research. More anecdotally, maybe just what we've seen. It could be, the risk appetite or the business climate that we see from some of, our industry counterparts in the U.S. As they work globally in very competitive worlds. I don't know that there are governments in the world that have gone to digital identity far ahead of Canada, and their citizens are reaping the rewards there. I don't know. Dalibor or Kevin, do you want to attempt to help with that answer? It's
Well,
a tough one.
I would say that the big challenge that we heard over and over and over again is the residency of data and privacy of data, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, like, almost by definition, our brethren and sisters in down south have had this advantage that all the cloud providers from the get-go were locally present, and we did not have that. So I think Canada has been catching up on that for the last decade or so, and now I believe that everyone of material size internationally actually now is established in Canada and can guarantee data sovereignty both in residence and in transit. Right, that solves one big problem. Right. I think the second problem is the problem of talent, as you described. I think that, like, in the grand scheme of things, the talent is an issue, and there is not enough of it. The third thing that I would suggest is that I think that there is a resistance in the organizations to generally. There's an intuitive sense that this is where we need to go, but then there is a resistance to actually move, which I think touches very much on what Kevin described earlier, that the technology is no longer really a problem here. What is the issue is compelling case that will paint the picture of better future, to compel people to actually make the choice and make the move. Right. This is this cheese is moving kind of story, but in this case, I think cheese has left the table altogether. It's a different thing that's on the other side, and it can be very, very scary. Right?
Yeah. Thanks, Dalibor. Why don't we just go to the next slide? And this is kind of a titled Our Early Sense of Ambition, right? So what we heard, it's interesting, we heard that many of our executives that we surveyed are very confident in their cloud adoption or cloud migration efforts, with the expected discrepancies across industries. But it hasn't necessarily translated into a bold forecast for future progress. So we see, leaders anticipating moving workloads, some more to private cloud, as well as public cloud, and in low percentages, which is interesting. And maybe how we ask the question, like, how many do you anticipate moving more workloads to the cloud, right, as opposed to scaling up where you are already in the cloud? I don't know, Kevin, do you want to weigh in on this a little bit? And there's a question here related to private cloud, but maybe we'll come back to that in a moment. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, when we're kind of speculating as far as where Canada stands broadly, I love this data point on the top right there. 74% believe that their cloud capabilities are ahead or far ahead of those of their peers, despite very modest forecasts as far as what the next 3 years holds, right? And so, I'd love to tell you that we very strategically filtered on only the true cloud leaders as far as who we survey, but that was absolutely not the case. And so I think there is perhaps a little bit of overconfidence there, and we don't want to speculate too much, but I think the survey definitely lends an overall view of Canada's broad approach to cloud as that of like a fast follower. And when we talk about relative to the US or some of the other countries, I think there's probably a higher sense of urgency that we would like to see, and that certainly in our paper we make a bit of a stronger case for as we look at these numbers. But again, it's so hard to generalize. Like, we definitely saw different dynamics that you can kind of see play out by sector in the bottom right there as well. But I think when we think about the concept you introduced there, Karin, around the cloud adoption plateau, I think it's that tough transition from the initial investments that you make to trying to scale that for the organization. I think that's tough sledding, and that bears out in some of the numbers on the left here, and that bore out in a lot of the conversations that we had with some of the large organizations that are trying to get their arms around this right now.
Yeah. So the question related to private clouds was, are on-prem private clouds used at all by governments? And if so, how are they used as a stepping stone to public cloud? And we see on-prem private clouds in significant use, both in governments and in the commercial sector. A lot of it in financial services, for sure. There are early adopters of that. And data residency made them a little shy for public cloud. And so, there was strong movement to private cloud already kind of leading the curve. And I guess to answer the question about this as a stepping stone to public cloud, it does raise a lot of the similar issues related to building skills, putting governance in place, things like chargeback, putting all those things in place for private cloud can translate into public as well, and charge back to various departments and users. I'll also say having to put maybe some specific training programs in place, but also around like some of the technologies that support both private and public cloud, with respect to tooling, monitoring, performance management. And so when you start to put some of those things in place for private cloud, some of them translate well to public, not all of them, but it can be used as a stepping stone.
So thank you for that, Karin. What I would also like to suggest is that we should not discount the fact that many of the governments and public sector entities have already adopted public cloud solutions as well. Mm-hmm. And so certainly private cloud, we see it as you just described, but I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree that private cloud needs to be viewed as a stepping stone towards public cloud.
No. I think it's the way the question was phrased that I was trying to address.
Yeah.
Can be used as a stepping stone.
It not can
necessarily, be. Yeah.
But we are seeing like most provincial governments are already either on public cloud solutions for the core ERPs or are in the midst of the process. Most municipalities, same story. Most of them have subscriptions to large cloud platforms. So there is definitely private cloud is there, but there is definitely a very significant public cloud engagement in the public sector. Absolutely. I love the fast follower remark. I think that's very true. It's fast follower, but a lot of good things are actually happening in our public sector across the country on both private and public cloud. Yeah. Excellent. So here's a question. I did read the report, and in that report, a couple of things have been identified as sort of challenges, big challenges with respect to cloud adoption. One of those is multi-cloud environments that many of our clients find themselves in. The second identified was security. The third one, we already touched on it, the talent consideration. So maybe what we do next is unpack those three big challenges one by one, starting with multi-cloud first. So could you share with us, what did you find? What are the leaders saying about the multi-cloud and how they think about multi-cloud as benefits, but also as a risk?
Yeah, good question, Dalibor. Sherry, let's go to the next page. And when we did our Deloitte 360 conference, we had David Lithicum, who's our global chief cloud strategy leader for Deloitte. He runs our Deloitte on Cloud podcast, and he specifically led a kind of full 1 hour session on managing the increased complexity that's tied to multi-cloud, that's tied to hybrid cloud environments. It's a big challenge for sure. I think when we talk with some of our US clients and colleagues, there's a bit of a sense of inevitability around this, in the sense that, in a large organization, it's very hard to have everything kind of centrally orchestrated and coordinated. And so, if you have, particularly as you move to a series of teams working in kind of smaller sprints, you may end up migrating a handful of applications to AWS. Perhaps you move a lot of your Microsoft environments to Azure. You end up doing something in your marketing department with with Google's AI services in GCP. And before you know it, you've kind of backed your way into multi-cloud. And I think that's a common story that we hear from a lot of our clients, perhaps without fully realizing the downstream complexity and in some cases costs that can create for operations. As far as the survey data, like without a doubt, organizations are viewing multi-cloud as part of their strategy. You see that in that 93% number. Not dissimilar with some of the themes that we've talked about. They're approaching it in a conservative fashion. And so I think digging in on some of the data, 88% had some form of a primary cloud provider. This typically focused on a primary cloud provider, a secondary cloud provider for specialized use cases only. We heard a lot in our interviews around concerns building talent and capability. Let's start with one cloud provider and get a bit of scale and some connective tissue in the organization built up, and then we'll worry about scaling on a second or third provider. As far as the drivers and the benefits, I think, Dalibor, a few years ago, we would have seen vendor lock-in at the top of the list. It was still on there and present, but the top drivers were around increased flexibility, improved resiliency, and access to more services. And so that third piece kind of dovetails with what Karin talked about, I think, is each of the hyperscalers are trying to differentiate themselves as a lot of the kind of core IaaS services are getting perhaps a bit commoditized. They're trying to build out the services available within each of their ecosystems. And this notion of striving for a best of breed approach where you can capitalize on some of those things. I think the risks really come down to increased investment, complexity, and training were the three that top the list in our survey data. On the right here, you can kind of see that data point around public cloud. I think we're surprised to see the prevalence of private cloud, especially for some of our large organizations. I think it came through in the interviews that this notion of a stepping stone, the investments that they've made in terms of virtualization and what that entails from a tooling and process standpoint, I think they feel that will make the transition to public cloud easier. I think most CIOs feel that their private cloud providers, whether it be internal or external, have not effectively kept up with the pace of the new services, the new innovations that are available via the hyperscaler platforms.
Well, to me, that last comment, that's the hidden value proposition that just has never, ever in the past, ever been available to the degree that it is now, working with hyperscalers who are actually continuously innovating and exposing these new things to you as a client without you even asking or thinking or not. Like this is, I think, exceptionally compelling proposition. For the last 50 years, everything we did in IT was what we did in IT. And if somebody wanted something new, we had to do it, right? And there was always a question of who's going to fund this, how much it's going to cost, blah, 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 blah. And you end up in the state we were in. This is the first time that actually new things and new ideas and innovation is being exposed to people without them asking on a regular, quarterly or bi-yearly basis. It is incredible, right? So what a great proposition there to contemplate, how can you bring in this innovation to your organization through these cloud providers? If you are on a public cloud and working with hyperscalers. This is excellent. Security was another challenge, another challenge, another risk, another opportunity. I wonder if you might sort of shed some light on that aspect of the research.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go to the next page. We spoke earlier about a bit of a paradox there, just in terms of security being identified at the top of the list as both a challenge and an area of opportunity. In the bottom left there, it's interesting. Most of there are concerns that persist. 58% of cloud leaders find it challenging to convince organizational decision makers of the security of cloud, the top concerns being around data privacy and security of hybrid multi-cloud environments, just building on what we just covered. I think the leaders that we spoke to in our interviews viewed cloud as certainly more secure, public cloud as more secure, to the point Karin made earlier, with all of the investments that they're making in their environments, in their data centers. It's more a question of how they evolve their support model. And you know, this idea that a lift and shift of the controls that you have in place today is not going to work, because the actual support model changes. It's a shared accountability between the organization and the cloud provider. A lot of the you know, in terms of how to manage this as an area, some of the mitigants on the right-hand side, you see a lot of it kind of coming down to talent. 3 to the top 4 priorities for managing security are based on training, hiring, or augmenting security staff. I think in our point of view in the report, we identify practices from more mature organizations to better embrace security, both culturally, organizationally, but also tactically embedding security into the development process, earlier in the development process, you know, what the industry would refer to as DevSecOps. Karin, I don't know if there's anything else you'd add from a security standpoint.
No, you know, we're getting late in the hour, and I think we want to keep going on the skills for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sherry, I think
Let's
you can
move
go
on.
yeah, two slides down here. Go ahead, Dalibor.
Yeah. So the next one I think is on the so talent front.
Yeah. So talent ranked #1 is a key success factor, ahead of some of the other, you know, I'll say more technical factors, reinforced in a lot of the interviews that we had. Not surprisingly, cloud engineering and security top the list of talent needs. But there's also a healthy percentage on the right-hand side there of folks that identified business skills required to help unlock business value and drive transformation. You know, we covered this a little bit earlier, Dalibor. I think there isn't a silver bullet. In the research report, and this is kind of working with our human capital team, we talk about a number of different approaches, from taking a capability lens to being really deliberate around defining and tracking and delivering against your talent needs and requirements over time. We talked about sourcing talent from different, in some cases, unconventional sources, looking at broader ecosystems for talent. And we talked about driving change in the way work gets done. And I think this last piece is a trend that we see a lot of demand for in market, in our practice. You know, if you think of this transition from project management to product management, and all that entails in terms of the organizational model, bringing teams together in terms of, you know, a shift left to bring operations, to bring security earlier into the development cycle, the technology development cycle. A lot of focus on that, and obviously very close ties to cloud as an enabler of that shift.
Yeah, it's excellent. So now what? The next question is, so now what? So based on this research, I know that you mentioned you had some recommendations on what organizations and leaders could be thinking and doing. So why don't we move there and have a little bit of a show and tell of what might be some of those recommendations you may have based on the research you've just completed?
Yeah, for sure. And Karin, there's a couple of good questions in the chat as well that we should circle back on.
So Shiri, if we can move on to the next one, slide wide, and then
let's go to the next page here, which is, I think, the more forward-looking piece.
Yeah.
So in terms of what next, Dalibor, or you know, again, coming back to this common shared story of transitioning from foundation to scaling capabilities for the organization. How do you do that with pace? And so Karin and I spoke with a number of our Canadian leaders and global leaders, folks that have been kind of on the front lines of larger scale enterprise cloud migration modernization programs to understand, you know, what are the things that need to be in place to do this well, to go fast. And you know, this is kind of our Dave Letterman style top 10 list, but I'll try and simplify it here a little bit. I think there's a big theme around treating this as a true transformation. It can't be purely an infrastructure concern, you know, and that means top-down support, starting with the board and the C-suite. It means having buy-in from the business, like clearly tying to business outcomes. I mean, we're talking a multi-year significant investment here. And so it's hard to sustain a multi-year transformation program without a kind of clear articulation of a vision for business transformation for business, like clear business outcomes defined. You know, some of the planning work, and we talk about various organizational constructs in terms of how you do this, whether it's through a COE or a business management office that supports the central cloud team, but taking the time to integrate with the lines of business on their roadmaps. And so you're planning and integrating how that transition to cloud, how that capability build for cloud integrates with their business transformation plans and their investment plans. You know, there's different approaches, I think, depending on the organization, but certainly some common themes that we heard around making sure you're fleshing out repeatable deployment patterns to drive pace, that you're kind of front loading some of the work required in terms of security, in terms of some of the risk and compliance functions, particularly for financial services or public sector organizations. And you know, setting those up as patterns that can be repeated in different parts of the organization to move more quickly. Certainly a focus on talent is kind of peppered throughout some of these items. Being really thoughtful in terms of how to scale deployment teams and disseminate learnings as you know, you're scaling up the kind of pace and throughput for a larger scale migration or modernization. We talked about this, Dalibor, you talked about partnerships with hyperscalers. I think you could broaden that out, certainly there's an expanded ecosystem of systems integrators, solution providers, hyperscalers. That can be a source of investment, certainly a source of talent. Augmenting your talent, particularly in the early stages, but more importantly, helping you build capability, helping drive training programs within your organization, you know, working side by side with your in-house talent to sort of teach the team how to fish, so to speak. So, you know, again, we could spend quite a bit of time on this, Dalibor, but I think that's the highlights for our top 10 list here.
Yeah, and this is indeed an excellent list that people can use to check things off and think of each one of those. It's already triggering me to think about, you know, how is this applicable to the clients I work with. You mentioned a couple of questions that we still got from the audience. One was around like anything they can share about any cloud accelerators, tools, models that could be useful and helpful. The second question that came through was, you know, what are the more traditional providers of infrastructure services doing in this climate where hyperscalers are aggressively sort of present?
I can make a couple of comments on both of those, and you know, those are both kind of meaty questions, right? So yeah. Cloud accelerators, tools, models, you know, we don't have the time here to go deep into them, but what I'd say is, you know, automation, infrastructure as code, you know, looking for tooling that aligns to your, like, each individual client's long-term cloud strategy, right? So all the cloud providers have native tooling, and if you are very committed to one cloud provider and that's your direction for the foreseeable future, you can save a lot of money just going with the native tooling, right? The native tooling is there for that. Most of the native tooling today doesn't necessarily work, you know, adapt into a multi-cloud environment. And so if that's your path, then you need to be more thoughtful and planful in choosing your tooling upfront, right? Yeah. And you may need help for that and that's where expertise, you know, from more neutral third parties may come in versus just the hyperscalers. With respect to traditional infrastructure providers, you know, the hyperscalers are some of the biggest companies in the world now, right? Like you look at Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they are among the largest organizations in the world with the biggest budgets in R&D. So I'd say what I'm seeing, of course, is that the DXCs, IBMs, or, you know, Kyndryls, or some of the other pure plays, it's a if you can't beat them, join them model, right? So they provide services that wrap around the public cloud providers, just as they have around traditional infrastructure providers. And that's
you.
what we're seeing. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's we need to wrap it up. I think we're coming down the wire on time. So I want to take the moment and thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Karin, for sharing your views on this report. This was very, very insightful, and I certainly learned a lot. Couple of things before I let the audience go. First, we are going to send all of you a link so you can download this report and read it yourselves at your leisure. Obviously, and of course, if you have questions or interested to learn more, Karin and Kevin are the people to connect with, so please do so. Next week, at this same time, same day, Wednesday next week, we're going to go back into the CIO interview format, and I will be hosting Penny Ray, the CIO of Alberta Health Services, which is Canada's largest health service provider. So that should be a very interesting conversation. And then the last thing that I wanted to remind everyone is Tech Trends 2022 was just published today. And I will send you all the links to Tech Trends as well in the same email I'll follow up with on this report, and also invite you to register for a series of live webcasts that we will host in January to sort of unpack all of these tech trends, bring deeper insights. I'll have the authors of the Tech Trends report join me for that conversation. So with that, thank you very much, Kevin and Karin again. Audience, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Same time, same channel.
Thank you so much, Dalibor. Thanks to the audience. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.